Okay, now we're talking about independent cinema, whether it's Huntsville or parts of Alabama or Colorado Springs. The reason why is our featured review, in my opinion, our featured review for this week, number one with a bullet, in my opinion, is The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster from RLJE Films. It's in theaters June 9th, and I'm hoping it's playing in nearby Bruce Porky's area or Eric Holmes' area, or listener, maybe somewhere around your area. It's written and directed by Bomani J Story, Eric Holmes recently interviewed Story, and that's available on our Deepest Dream YouTube channel as well as our Find Your Film podcast feed. But he interviewed Bomani for this movie, and it's a very, really good interview because Bomani talks about how this movie is inspired, this tale is inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that iconic story. And this is basically a Frankenstein-esque story. I think, Eric Holmes, you mentioned reading the Mary Shelley novel some years back, so you have experience on the Frankenstein tale. But vis-a-vis this story, I don't know how to pronounce it, Eric. It's Vicaria or Vicaria. There's a big to-do about it in the pronunciation in the beginning regarding a really mean teacher, which I feel like a mean teacher if I get her name wrong, but I'm going to say Vicaria, played by Laya DeLeon Hayes, and she is, I believe it's Laya. How do you pronounce it? Laya DeLeon Hayes. She's a lead.
Leia, I guess.
Leia. Okay, let's go. Laya DeLeon Hayes. She's fantastic in this movie. She plays Vicaria, and she is a teenager who has experienced so much loss in her life and she's a very smart young lady. She believes, quote, that death is a disease. Death is a disease that can be cured. How will she cure the disease? By resurrecting her brother from the dead. Her brother was recently killed in a gang shooting, and you realize towards the end what the circumstances of that shooting. But in the beginning, you see him dead. She basically takes his corpse and she resurrects him. And we're not going to get into the weeds about how she resurrects him. She's a very smart scientist, and she thinks because by resurrecting her dead brother, Chris, he's going to come back to the family. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. But the problem, Chris, look, it's not the angry black girl and Chris. It's the angry black girl and her monster. Chris is a monster, and Chris ultimately wreaks havoc within the city, the neighborhood that Vicaria lives in. That is the premise of The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. There are moments in this movie, which I believe it runs 92 minutes. It's genre thriller, it says here in the press release, but I think it's also horror because I was terrified by certain sequences in this movie. This movie also co-stars Chad L. Coleman, who you might know from The Wire and I believe The Walking Dead. He's very, very good in this movie as well as her dad. So that is a premise, terrifying, impressive film from Bomani J Story, his feature film debut as a director. Let's start off with Bruce Perky. I haven't heard about your initial thoughts on this movie. Are you excited about this movie as much as I am? Did it have flaws? It's really getting well reviewed. Are you swimming with the current, or do you see some flaws within the narrative?
No, I liked it quite a bit. This is a pretty cool movie, and I would definitely co-sign on checking out the interview Eric gave as well. You should check it out. I think that the filmmaker he was talking to had a great time in the interview as well, and it made it a really fun listen. And they don't think they really get any spoilers. It's Frankenstein, so
Yeah.
you kind of know the idea of Frankenstein. I appreciated a lot of things about this movie. First of all, and they talk about this in the interview a little bit, the idea of Frankenstein's been done a million times in different ways, and doing it in this setting is really interesting, and I think adds a lot of layers, but it never goes full A24. That's what I think is kind of interesting about this movie. This movie could be, it's serious, but it could be like super serious and super artsy, and kind of just forget the pulpy side, the Frankenstein monstery side of it. But I think this kind of does both. It kind of plays in both worlds, and I think it does a pretty good job of balancing that. It has some genre fun with the whole proceedings. It's not afraid to give her a laboratory, right? She has her own laboratory of sorts, and they kind of play that up. I also love just kind of the joke of it, in a sense. It's not a joke, but the joke that she's literally an angry or a mad scientist, if you think about it. I thought that was kind of great. In the title, she's angry, but she's a mad scientist too. So I love that kind of thing. But I think the real strength of this movie is taking this well-known story and just plopping it in the setting. And you mentioned The Wire, and it's almost like a neighborhood that can be in The Wire. You've got this small neighborhood with families living their lives, but there's constant threat of violence. There's kind of this constant, this kind of little miniature, I wouldn't tell him a drug lord, but kind of the drug dude in that little vicinity, and how that person holds certain power within that realm. And I thought that Denzel Whitaker was really cool and a really interesting foil for the Vicaria character. But she is the story here, right? Her performance and her character is what steals the show and what really gives it a really great focus, because she's rightfully angry. She's just trying to make this a better place, but she's also a little messed up, because when you see her going through all of her experiments and stuff, she looks a little, a little bit like she's too into it, and then she doesn't think it all out. So in some ways it's a little bit like Reanimator too, where, hey, we're going to try this out and then it doesn't, or maybe Pet Cemetery, where things aren't going to go quite like you think. And last but not least, I really enjoyed that it could take some interesting detours. There's a moment, I would say, or not a moment, there's a sequence about, I don't know, 2/3 this way through the movie where the whole extended friend family group has a dinner. I mean, I could see a lot of notes from studios being like, you can't have that in there. That's why is that in there? And I'm like, I loved that scene. See, I almost wanted more of that. So weirdly, I think the monstery, scary stuff was the least interesting stuff in this movie, although of course it had to be there. I was more interested in the characters to some degree, but I liked it quite a bit.
Right. And I love the themes about death being a disease, especially in that area. But the Bomani doesn't beat you over the head with that theme. It's just fully integrated within the story.
It's on the nose, but it's also not trying to be super metaphoric. It's just like, hey, this is it. This is what happens here.
Yeah. Eric, you have the closest relationship to this movie with the interview. Your thoughts on this film?
Yeah, I really like this one a lot. First of all, I love Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the story, the various adaptations of it. I'd always wanted to see like a kind of true adaptation of it. They kind of almost got there with the movie Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that Frank Darabont wrote, that what's his name directed? Kid Branagh. That wasn't great, but so when I read books that I like and then I see movies based on them, I want one of two things. One, either get as faithful to the source material. If the source material is great, be as faithful as you can to it, or have a different take on it, a different interesting take. And this one was definitely the latter. It definitely wasn't Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It kind of had a different kind of angle to it. Think of Vicaria. She was essentially Dr. Frankenstein in this. And in the story, it's Frankenstein makes a monster. He's disgusted by it, throws it away, and the monster gets rejected by society, and it's misunderstood monster. That's what that's about. And then eventually the monster becomes angry at his creator and wants to come back for him. This one feels like kind of flipping it around. Whereas the monster's not misunderstood. It's Dr. Frankenstein, or Vicaria in this case, that's misunderstood. She's trying to do something great, but everything that comes out of that is just horrifying and not helping and hurting people, which was not her intent. It was just a science experiment that got out of hand, and it was a really interesting take on it. Bomani J story in the interview talks about reading the story and seeing some stuff they left on the table, and he wanted to kind of pick that up and run with it, and I think he did a great job of it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting movie. I was surprised at how much I really love this movie, and like Bruce said, just great performances all around. The Angry Black Girl and Her Monsters in theaters on June 9th. Hopefully this is one of these movies where if you miss it in theaters, hopefully on streaming or on demand digital, people will this is a movie that I feel will be getting a lot of views just based on word of mouth. Let's start with our ratings. Bruce Berkey, your rating on this film?
I'm torn. I think I'm going to go 4 stars. I think it's very good. It didn't quite stratosphere for me, and I don't know if it's just because the horror elements weren't quite horrific enough for me, but yeah, whatever. It's really good. So
yeah, it's a really good movie for me. I love the horror stuff. I love the social stuff. This is close to a perfect movie for me. So I'm giving The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster 4.5 out of 5 stars. We're closing out with your rating, Eric Holmes.
I think I'm going to go 5 on this. As much as I love the original Mary Shelley's story, this is how you do adaptations. You know, it's not a perfect one-for-one remake, but at the same time, you can tell there's a lot of artistry and thoughtfulness behind it. You know, as far as the gore goes, I nearly threw up a couple times. So extra points for that.
That is something else. Yeah. Okay. So that is a 5-star banger from Eric Combs, 4.5 stars from me, and 4 stars from Bruce Brookie. Again, the angry black girl and her monster in theaters June 9th.